Hey everybody, Mauricio Raoult here, founder and CEO of Premier Law Group, and thank you for joining me on this, what I think is going to be a relatively short video. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the issues my clients have, which involve international investors. A lot of times you're getting some people from Canada or South America or wherever, and there's a couple of considerations you need to keep in mind, especially for Canadians. So I'll address the Canadian investors at the end, but some people have gotten into some trouble with unhappy Canadian investors. But a couple things. Number one, if you're exclusively dealing internationally, so you've got international investors and your deal happens to be in international waters, and you do not advertise in the US, so you're just dealing with offshore, which is a little bit off topic, but there is a different exemption here called Regulation S as in Sam. So we probably want to take a look at that, and that's a scenario where you have just advertising outside of the country. But when you have a US deal, you've got mostly US investors, but there's somebody from Canada, let's say, that wants to come in your deal, and you say, great, whatever, he's international, whatever. Here's the challenge. You really want to be careful, and you want to work with a really good CPA who deals with international transactions, because number one, most people forget about, is when you are dealing with international folks, you basically become an agent of the IRS, and you are required, prior to sending them whatever their distributions are, you are required to withhold 30% of that money. And you've got to send that to the Department of Treasury, and you essentially have to withhold that money. And let me just backtrack. What that does is it forces the international investor to file a US tax return so that they can recoup part or all of that 30%. Because if you didn't withhold that, they've got no incentive, they're in Canada, they're in Asia, they have no incentive to file US tax returns. So you're required to withhold the 30%, and you will be legally responsible for that if for whatever reason the investor doesn't pay the tax and they find out, you're going to be on the hook. So that's something that's very, very important. One of the easy ways around that, well, easy for you anyway, is if the investor can set up a US LLC and fund the investment through a US LLC, then that takes them away from the international part. You can just issue the K-1 to the LLC, you can wire the money to the US LLC, and they can then worry about how to get that back to their current country of origin. Quick note about Canadians. Canadians, and again, you want to make sure you're not a professional, I'm certainly not a tax professional, you want to insist that they check with their Canadian CPA, but Canada does not recognize the LLC, right? So most of our syndications are going to be LLCs. They don't recognize it an LLC, and so they default to a corporation, which, what does that mean? That means they get double taxed. So when you send them that nice $10,000 distribution, they're going to have to pay taxes twice as a corporation. First tax as a corporation, and then tax as an individual. So you want to be very careful about that. The way around that, and again, this is coming from sources from my Canadian CPA friends, the way around that is for them to set up what's called a limited liability limited partnership, which is something they recognize. It's not available in every state. And recently, some people have told me they can just do a regular LP, so maybe look into that as well. And again, this is something that's going to come from the Canadian CPA. But if they can create this LLP in the US, and again, fund it through that LLP, number one, it solves your problem, because now you're just issuing a K-1 to the LLP, and from their perspective, they don't get the double taxes. Now the money's coming from an LLP, they recognize those, and it'll be just disregarded or just passed through like we have here in the United States with our LLCs. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. If you need to get a hold of me, you know where to find me. I'm at premierlawgroup.net, and looking forward to the next video.